Thor fishes for Jormungand. The gods had arranged a lavish feast with Aegir and Ran, two gracious and hospitable giants who dwelt beneath the sea. Aegir and Ran offered to host the banquet, but only if the gods could provide them with a kettle big enough to brew mead for all of the invited guests. The gods knew that, of all the beings in the 9 worlds, only the giant Hymir possessed a cauldron large enough for this purpose. Thor, the brawniest and bravest of the gods, as well as one of the most accustomed to dealing with the giants, not all of whom were as friendly to the gods as are Aegir and Ran, volunteered to obtain this cauldron from Hymir. Upon the god's arrival to his house, Hymir slaughtered 3 bulls for provisions for the 2 during Thor's stay. The giant was shocked and dismayed, however, when Thor ate 2 of the bulls in one sitting to assuage his legendary hunger. Because of this, the angry giant declared they would need to go fishing in the morning for the next day's food. In the morning, Hymir sent Thor to procure bait for their hooks. Thor went to Hymir's pastures and slaughtered the biggest of the giant's remaining bulls, intending to use the head as bait. Hymir was now more irritated than ever at the rash youngster, but hoped his strength and daring would be of help on their fishing trip. The 2 got into the boat with Thor in the stern. The god rowed them out to Hymir's usual fishing grounds, where the giant, to his delight, caught 2 whales. But then, Thor began to row the boat further out from land. His companion grew fearful and demanded that they row back at once, because, he reminded Thor, Jormungand lurks below these wild waves. Thor, the age-old enemy of that monstrous sea serpent, refused. At last, Thor dropped the oars and cast his line into the water. After an ominous silence and calm, Thor felt a mighty tug on his line. As he reeled it in, a violent rumbling shook the boat and whipped the waves. The giant grew pale with terror, but Thor persisted. His feet were planted so firmly in the bottom of the boat that the planks gave way and water began pouring in. When the serpent's head, with the hook in his venom-dripping mouth, at last came up above the water, Thor reached for his hammer. At this moment, Hymir panicked and cut the line. The howling snake slunk back down into the ocean. Thor, enraged at having missed his opportunity to end his greatest foe, heaved Hymir overboard. Thor, with the 2 whales slung over his shoulders, waded back to land, picked up Hymir's cauldron, and returned home to Asgard. Thor, the Bride. One morning, Thor awoke to find his hammer, Mjolnir, or lightning, missing. This was no small matter. Without the Thunder God's best weapon, Asgard was left vulnerable to the attacks of the giants. In a rage, he searched everywhere for his most prized possession, but it was nowhere to be found. The goddess Freya owned falcon feathers, with which one could change one's shape into that of a falcon. She lent these to Thor and Loki so that the hammer could be located. Loki, who knew how to shift his shape, donned the feathers and flew off in search of the treasure. He quickly surmised that it had probably been stolen by the giants, so he rode the winds to their homeland, Jotunheim. Upon his arrival, he changed back into his god form and approached the chief of the giants, Thrym, or Noisy. When questioned regarding the hammer, Thrym answered that he had indeed taken it, and that it was buried 8 miles below the ground, and, added the lonely, ugly giant, he had no intention of returning it until Freya was made to be his bride. Loki flew back to Asgard and told this news to his fellow gods, who were alarmed and furious, especially Freya. As they sat in council, Heimdall put forth the following solution: that Thor go to Jotunheim disguised as Freya, and thereby win back his hammer and take vengeance on its thieves. Thor protested, saying that this was a dishonorable and unmanly thing to do, and that all of the inhabitants of Asgard would mock him for it for the rest of his days. Loki pointed out, however, that if he didn't consent to Heimdall's plan, Asgard would be ruled by the giants. The gods thereby obtained Thor's acquiescence. No detail was spared in the assemblage of Thor's bridal dress. After the humiliated god had donned the costume, Loki offered to go with him as his maidservant. The pair climbed into Thor's goat-drawn chariot and made their way to Jotunheim. When they arrived, they were welcomed by Thrym, who boasted that the gods had at last brought him the prize he was due. At dinner, Thor and Loki found themselves in trouble. Thor single-handedly ate an entire ox, 8 salmon, and all of the dainties that had been prepared for the women, not to mention the many barrels of mead he drank. This made Thrym suspicious, and he declared that he had never in his whole life seen a woman with such appetite. Loki quickly devised a response. "The fair goddess has been so lovesick for you," he claimed, "that she has not been able to eat for a week." Thrym accepted this answer and was overcome by a desire to kiss his bride. When he peeled back the veil, Thor's eyes glared at him so intently that they had seemed to burn holes right through him. He exclaimed, "Never have I seen a maiden with such frightfully piercing eyes." Loki, the master of deceit, explained to the giant that while Freya had been unable to eat, she had also been unable to sleep, so fierce was her longing for him. The ceremony soon followed. As was customary, Thrym called for the hammer to hollow their union. When Mjolnir was laid in Thor's lap, he grabbed its handle and slew first Thrym, and then all of the guests, before contentedly returning to Asgard and changing back to his preferred clothes. Thor's duel with Hrungnir. Hrungnir, or the Brawler, was the mightiest of all the giants, the spirits of darkness, winter, night, and the grave, who are often enemies of the gods. One day Hrungnir was paid a visit in Jotunheim, the homeland of the giants, by Odin. Hrungnir didn't recognize the god at first, and instead wondered aloud who this stranger might be whose horse could ride through the air and the water, as he had seen the horse do at the god's approach. Odin bet his head that his horse, none other than the 8-legged shamanic steed Sleipnir, could outrun any horse in Jotunheim. Hrungnir was insulted by this provocation, and straightway accepted the bet, and mounted his own horse, Gorfaxi, or Golden Mane. The two raced through mud and streams, over steep rocky hills, and between the trees and thick woodlands, before the giant realized that he had passed through the gates of Asgard, the home of the gods. And of course, he still hadn't caught up with Odin and Sleipnir. The gods, seemingly in good cheer, invited him to drink with them. After he had become drunk, he became belligerent, and boasted that he would kill all of the gods, except for Freya and Sif, the wife of Thor. These two lovely goddesses he would carry back to Jotunheim with him. Freya alone was stout of heart enough to continue filling his horn. Next he bellowed that he would drink every last drop of the god's ale. The gods soon grew tired of his anger and sent for Thor, who had been elsewhere, fighting other giants. When Thor arrived and discovered the situation, he lifted his hammer and prepared to slay Hrungnir there on the spot. The bellicose, and yet we may suspect inwardly fearful, giant accused Thor of cowardice for intending to kill someone who was himself unarmed. "Your name would be held in far higher honor," the giant declared, "if you will accept my challenge to a duel." Never one to lose an opportunity to gain renown and prove his abilities, Thor accepted. When the arranged time had arrived, Hrungnir walked to the field near Jotunheim, where the duel was to be held. He wore stone armor and brandished a stone shield, and menacingly waved a whetstone, his chosen weapon, in the air above him. Suddenly he saw lightning and heard thunder clap above him, and Thor roared onto the battlefield. Thor hurled his hammer at the giant, and the giant slung his whetstone at the god. The stone burst against Thor's forehead and shattered into pieces. And this is the origin of all flint on Earth. Thor's hammer also struck Hrungnir's head, but this time it was the giant's head that was shattered. But a piece of Hrungnir's whetstone was lodged in Thor's forehead. And so Thor sought out the sorceress Groa, or Thriving, who sang spells over the stone to remove it from the god's brow. When Thor felt the stone moving, he told the sorceress many joyous things to encourage her, but chiefly that he had encountered her lost husband, who would soon be home. But Groa was so overcome with emotion upon hearing this that she forgot her chance, and the rock remained lodged in Thor's face until his death at Ragnarok.
Thank you, my friends, for joining me for our story today. Your time is very precious to me. If you enjoyed our story, please like the video, subscribe to my channel, and turn on notifications, and share our little get-togethers with your friends. All of these things are incredibly helpful to get our stories out to more friends. I had such a wonderful time with you all today, and I hope you'll join me again tomorrow, where I will read a new tale and invite you once again to stay a while and listen.